Okay, so welcome to this meetup of the HerStory Circle Brisbane. I have done 2 of these in the past and took a bit of a break over the hectic holiday period because, you know, everyone's too busy living their own lives at that stage. But my friend Maddie hooked me up with this amazing person, Anja, who so graciously agreed to present to us tonight and to share some of her amazing journey. So my part of this presentation is going to start from a global perspective, and then we're going to zoom in, and then we're going to just get right back into this room. So HerStory, what is it? This is the vision. What you see here is a picture of our founder, Gertrude Mache. Gertrude has a vision to connect people, especially women from all over the world, together to engage in social impact projects and all sorts of amazing things based on a very diverse history of activism, of entrepreneurship, and all of the many, many, many things that she's done in her own life. So making the impossible possible. This global and collaborative initiative brings together women from all cultures and creeds to join together in sharing inspirational, enlightening, uplifting personal stories and experiences of issues that are affecting women socially, economically, and environmentally. Now, one of the things that we always try to make very clear about HerStory is that it's something that we want to involve everyone in. Sometimes where's that crying coming from? All right, just had to mute you there for a minute. Okay. So with a name like HerStory, the whole movement, it is a global initiative. It can sometimes give off the impression that it's a women-only space, but the important thing that we need people to understand is the importance of including people from all gender identities in this whole vision, because the more people that we have in the room, the more diversity of ears, of perspectives, of voices, it creates, you know, it's like it creates a stronger network where our messages can reach other people. Because at the core of the whole initiative is the idea of healing and helping and connecting with each other through shared stories. And Michael, I'm glad you're here too, because your connection with Kagi's project, with Ubuntu Living, fits very well with the HerStory vision because it is based around the philosophy of Ubuntu. Yes. We have an online summit coming up next month. I'll just move my faces here. In the past, the HerStory conference has taken place in a number of different cities. Before everything went online, this was an in-person project. So the first set of conferences took place in Las Vegas, New York, Norway, in New Zealand, in Australia, in a whole bunch of places. But of course, now with COVID and everything else, everything's online. In 2021, the locations from which we are broadcasting, from which we have our chairpersons speaking, are what you can see on the screen. So yeah, from this region of the world, but also from Europe, Africa, North America. And the idea is to get this conference happening in 100 different locations around the world. Or was it 1,000? I don't remember, but the zeros don't matter. It's the connection that matters. For this upcoming summit, we are still looking for speakers. So if you or anyone you know would be a good fit for this conference, for this summit, direct them to the website, herstorycircle.com. The Queensland portion of the summit, there are two separate phases for Queensland, 8th, 9th, and 10th of March, and then the 14th through the 16th of March. The 2 dates in yellow that I've highlighted are the ones where I will be chairing for the full day. So, especially if you know anyone for those 2 days, you can send them my way. To register to speak in the online summit, people need to provide a 2-minute audition video. And these are the topics or the different categories in which we try to enroll speakers and put them into our program. All right. So after the 2-minute audition video, for any successful auditions, speakers are then invited to select a speaking package. The differences between each package are in the types of speaking opportunities that are available, as well as the types of publishing opportunities. So we'll talk about that a little bit at the end of this meeting. So we're zooming in even more now to this monthly meetup that I've launched. The reason I started this meetup was to grow the HerStory community and just get more people to just be aware of what the HerStory vision is. So a few notes about what this meetup is. It's a place for real and raw discussion. We do not apologize for TMI here. We don't hold back from sharing personal things. Whatever happens in this room stays in this room, except for, the fact that it's going to be recorded and published online. But if there's anything that you say that you think is just a bit too personal, or you'd rather keep your identity hidden in some way, just let me know and I will redact anything that needs to be removed from the publication of this session. Okay. It's a place of inclusion of all races, gender identities, beliefs, and lifestyles. Yeah, so anything goes here. We don't discriminate against anyone for anything as long as they're not hurting anyone. It's a place where social impact is a practice and not just a theory, which is also why it's so important for us to include more men in these discussions, to include more people of, whatever gender identity, whatever gender they identify with, because it's not always best to stay in an echo chamber when you're actually trying to make an impact in the world. If you're just speaking to people who are just like you, you might have a nice kumbaya session, but the whole purpose for this is to actually create something that might inspire an actual change. All right. This is also a platform to nurture speakers and listeners. With the online summits we've done, with the global conferences we've conducted, we've had speakers who have been speaking for the very first time ever, well, public speaking for the very first time ever, and people who are very seasoned speakers as well. So it's a very wide range of people of different speaking backgrounds. And it's wonderful when that happens, because the more experienced speakers become de facto mentors for the newer speakers, or people who just have a story to share versus people who have made speaking, like professional speaking, their full-time career in some cases. How did I get involved with this? I love telling this story because it really challenges my very pragmatic personality. You know, I'm not a very woo-woo person. I respect those things. It's just not me. But this is how it all happened. I was exhibiting for my coaching business, Leslie V Coaching, at the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival in 2019. What? 2019? No, 2020. Beginning of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. And someone came by my stand and we were chatting. Lovely gentleman. We were talking about what I do and why I do it and the kinds of people that I work with. And he said to me, he goes, "You remind me of someone." I was like, "Oh, who's that?" Because usually when people start sentences like that, they'll say things like, "Oh, Whoopi Goldberg," or some other like dreadlocked person. So I was just waiting for some generic answer. But he goes, "It's this woman. She's done a few TED Talks. She talks about the subject of Ubuntu. Her name is Gertrude Mache," something like that. And I was like, I feel like I may have seen one of her talks. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna go ahead and write that name down. So I wrote the name down, and I was like, I'll look her up later. Cool. So then said goodbye. The guy just kind of went off to live his life, and never heard from him again. The day after the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival, it's a 3-day event. The day after, I got an email from my friend Nick Cree. And he goes, "Hey, there's a conference happening this weekend. I think you'd be perfect for it. You're going to get an email from my friend who's putting it on. Her name is Gertrude Mache." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And he's like, well, no, he didn't respond because it was an email. But then I got an email from Gertrude and asking me to speak at this conference. And I thought, how? Because this was in no way connected to this conversation with the guy I met at the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival. And I was exhausted. I was just like, I've been standing straight and smiling, standing straight up and smiling for 3 days. Like I don't have any brain cells left. I've got stuff I want to do this weekend. Like I can't do this. But then I thought, no, this is too much of a coincidence. Like there's got to be something, there's got to be a reason this happened. You know, the universe is trying to tell me something. And so I did it. I was like, okay, I'll do it. So I dragged myself out of bed that weekend. And when I walked into the room where the conference was being held, Gertrude was there. I was the first one to arrive, as usual. And it was like this magnetic force just like pulling us together. And I was like, something is happening here. I didn't quite know what, but yeah. So to make a long story short, you know, we really clicked. And by the end of the conference, I approached her about having been wanting to do something similar, connecting people through sharing of stories. And she basically dubbed me the chairperson for Brisbane. And I was like, okay, I'm up for it. And yeah, we've been working together ever since. So that's my story. Now I want to know your story. Since there are only a few of us in the room at the moment, I want to hear from a couple of you. Just actually, usually I come in with a very specific question. since it's February, it's still the beginning of the year. I'm going to make my question this one. What is your word for 2021? Michael.
Yeah, I think my word for 2021, I have thought about this because I have watched your podcast stuff online, so I did go through this. Patience. I did pick that up halfway through last year, but still very busy at the moment. So I need that counterpoint of taking a breath and being patient with things. So that's my word for the year. Knowing I'm walking, a good one. That's what I'll need.
Awesome. All right, Stone, how about you? What's your word for 2021?
I had to turn on my sound and video. Allowing. That's my word.
Explain? Allowing.
Oh, allowing. Well, in the personal development world, a lot of people will say, "Oh, I'm going to attract. I'm going to manifest." Well, I think that's unnecessary, because everything that we say that we want and wanting really is a fiction, because everything that comes to mind we already have access to. And what prevents that access is our debilitating disbelief. So allowing what we already have, allowing what we are, which is light and love, and I don't mind. I'll go foo-foo on you.
Go for it.
So definitely allowing. That's my word for the year. And just to give you context, I'm ex-military, so we don't really do allow. We go action. So back in the day, anyway.
Oh, so we've got two ex-military here. That's cool. All right, thanks, Stone. All right, who's next? Right. Scott, are you there?
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right. What's your word for 2021?
What's my word for 2021?
Yeah.
Recover.
Huh? Did you say recover?
Yeah.
Oh. Can you explain?
So it's good fun. So the last year I've kind of gone a little bit haywire, like mentally and whatever else. And so a lot of it has to do with me piecing myself back together. And getting down to who I was before 2020. And even building myself up to someone better than I was.
Wow.
Because
so the word recover is going to be a very powerful little mini mantra to get you there, hopefully.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Basically. Like,
good.
Just actually at the beginning of this month, I got myself a new tattoo. And to help me along in this, it was, well, because you know that I play Dungeons and Dragons. And so I created a deity in that, and they became one of my favorite beings. And the saying that I came up with was, "May they hold us to our word." And so I have that now tattooed on me to basically symbolize me holding myself accountable for the words that I say.
Wow. I like that.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of growth in the last few months.
Good to hear.
And it's
Well, I'll definitely be following along on your journey, Scott, for sure.
Thanks. Like, it came after a pretty not fun time. Like, I don't know, how deep do you want to get into this?
I think we can leave it there for now. I can feel there's a mountain of something there. But,
yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll draw some of that out after the presentation.
Of course.
Thank you for sharing, Scott.
No worries. Happy to.
Cool. Tiffany, how are you?
Thank you. Sorry before. I thought it was me hearing you guys, but you guys were hearing me.
All right.
My word is actually survival, because this this is actually the hardest year of my life to date. I'm 43, and if I survive to the end of this year, this is what I'm aiming to do, because there's quite a lot happening, and when you try to be strong, you have to remind yourself about the things you can't change, the things you can, learn to live with, etc. But there's just too much happening that I don't have control over, that has so much control over me. So I'm just wanting to survive this year, really. Be that, I'll be happy.
Yeah, I remember some of the talks that we had a couple of years ago around some things, and hopefully we'll be able to connect on a one-on-one level about those things again very soon, because it sounds like we've got things to talk about.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, it's a bit morbid, but it's there. I just need to survive this year.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing, Tiffany.
Thank you.
All right. My word for 2021 is atomic. It's based on the book Atomic Habits. It's essentially just a reminder for me that like all those little tiny decisions that I make day to day can add up to something really big. So being really mindful of the things that might sneak up on me in terms of negative habit formation, and just trying to move those things aside as much as possible. All right. I'm going to ask this question after Anja's presentation. Our featured speaker is here with us, Anja Christoffersen, whose name I did spell correctly. Yay me. Oh, I had like a whole little bio thing I was going to read about you, but I'll just let you go for it. How about that? Do you need sharing permission? Do you have a, okay. So Anja, why don't you just start by telling us your word for 2021?
I think my word for 2021 is actually trust. Trusting myself, trusting where I'm at, trusting where I'm going. I think that trust can be applied to a lot of things, and it's something that I'm trying to learn and become more comfortable with. And thank you everybody for sharing your words. And please feel free to interject during my presentation if you have anything to say or any questions to ask or anything you'd like to clarify. I think sometimes on Zoom you can feel like you're talking to yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and I do that sometimes. I'll just talk to myself on Zoom. All right. Sometimes I'll just make new little recordings. Who knows? No, let's see. Has that come up as giving you sharing permission?
Yes.
Okay. Take it away, Anja.
All right. So I'm not going to do too much of an introduction because you're probably going to get sick of my voice by the time I'm done here. And thank you, Leslie, for saying that there's no TMI, because that was going to be my first warning. Open, very transparent. So if it's too much for you, mute your computer for a little bit. So it all actually started for me in the womb. 28 weeks of my mother's pregnancy, they noticed that she was growing too fast. There was too much fluid in her stomach. And they diagnosed me in an ultrasound that I had this condition called VACTERL. So VACTERL is a collection of different congenital abnormalities and malformations. And it occurs in 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 40,000 births. And that's such a wide range because there isn't much research into it. So what this meant was that I had vertebral issues. So I had scoliosis, I had sacral agenesis, where the bottom of your sacrum isn't formed, so I don't have a tailbone. This might not sound like a big issue, but the sacrum's actually responsible for a lot of pelvic nerves. So not having those bones there means that I do not have a lot of pelvic sensation. I had hemivertebra, which is half-formed vertebra, and an extra lumbar vertebra. So I'm nice and tall. A was for anal. So I was born with a cloaca. A cloaca is when you have one single opening. And what I had was I had my urethra from my bladder, I had 2 vaginal openings, and my intestines all coming into one common channel that came out. At birth, this wasn't functional. And they had to create a colostomy and a vesicostomy. So a bag for my bowel and my bladder, just to be able to get things out of my body. C was for cardiac. I had a hole in my heart. Thankfully, that was able to repair without surgical intervention. TE is for tracheal esophageal, so food pipe and air pipe. So my food pipe was actually connected into my air pipe rather than to my stomach. So I couldn't get any food or any water down to my stomach when I was born, and it actually just went straight into my lungs, which is obviously very dangerous. R is renal, so that's your kidney. I only was born with 1 kidney. L is limb. I was unaffected by this aspect, but you actually only need 3 of these things to qualify under that diagnosis. So I was a little bit overqualified. So like I said, at birth, I had the colostomy and the vesicostomy made. And I also had to have the reconstruction of my food pipe and my air pipe. And this all happened when I was 5 hours old. So the photos that you see on the side, they were actually Polaroid photos taken before I went in for my first surgery. And this was because I genuinely did not know if I would be able to survive the surgery in itself, let alone the days to follow, the weeks to follow, the years to follow. They had absolutely no idea what my future would look like. My parents, everyone was just so concerned because they suddenly had this little tiny disabled child that just wasn't really born to survive. And I couldn't survive without that medical intervention. That photo down the bottom is my mum having her first hug with me, and that was actually 4 or 5 days after I was born. So before then, I couldn't even be lifted up out of the crib because I had so many wires, there were alarms that were going off, I had fresh surgical wounds, and my parents were basically cast into this life of having to look after a baby with a colostomy bag and a vesicostomy for my bladder. So at 7 months of age, I had a full pelvic reconstruction where they cut from front to back and reconstructed all 3 pelvic openings. And after that, they were able to close up the colostomy and vesicostomy. And I had to go through a process of anal dilatation to actually make my anal opening large enough to pass things through. So that was a really hard process that my mum had to do when we got home, basically forcing plastic rods to break the skin open so I'd bleed until it would grow back in a bigger size and then would move up to the next size dilator. So it was a really quite a few challenging first few months. Unfortunately, it didn't get too much better in terms of my health. Up until the age of 5, I was very, very unwell and in and out of hospital. But as you can see in the photos, despite the, memorabilia or whatever from the hospital, I seemed like a really healthy, happy child. I was in and out of hospital for many reasons. One of them was recurrent infections. So I would continuously get infections in my chest, so pneumonia. And that was because my food pipe and air pipe, when they did that reconstruction, it meant that my air pipe and the bronchioles going into my lungs actually were collapsed. So they were sitting at a figure 8, and that was my normal breathing capacity. So even lying straight flat down, it's quite a struggle for me to breathe. It really did not work with sports getting older, but I didn't have the coordination for that anyway. With the swallowing component from the reconstruction of my food pipe, I didn't have those contractions going down my esophagus, so I couldn't actually swallow my food down. So often I'd get things that would get stuck, and I went into hospital over and over of a blueberry getting stuck or a hot cross bun getting stuck, and they'd actually have to go in, put me under anesthetic, remove it before I could actually get on my way, because it just couldn't come up, it couldn't go down, it was stuck. My mum would take me out to restaurants, and I'd be sitting there and suddenly I'd eat something, couldn't swallow it, and I'd have to throw it up. And my parents got all of these comments from other people in the restaurants that, you know, your daughter is too sick to be taken out of the house and things like that. And I had a nasty cough most of the time because of that repair, and it was a bit floppy. So it was that aspect. There was also my bowels weren't really moving through, so I often had to go into hospital for big clean outs and times where I'd be put on with a nasal gastric tube going into my stomach, feeding me laxatives for 5 or 6 days before I'd have any motion at all. It was like my whole system just wasn't really working properly for me. I was put on antibiotics basically the whole time, just to be able to get that, like, just to survive really, and not constantly be in hospital with infections. So despite all of those things, I was a really happy child, and that's me with my parents. And as you can see, I love dressing up in, you know, little fairy dresses and princess dresses, and I loved having my photo taken, which I didn't really realize was going to be a thing until much later on. In terms of school, I was able to start school at the same time as everybody else. I initially actually went for an interview at a private school because we thought that they'd be able to cope with my medical needs a little bit better. But at that time, I was really far above my developmental milestones. I could write my name, I could read a little bit. I was doing really well academically, but the school would not accept me because of my disability. So I went to the local public school, which actually ended up being incredible. I started doing dance. I really was living as much of an exciting life as I thought I could. And the thing was, at this stage, I actually did not realize that I was any different from anyone else. I had started doing bowel washouts, is what I called them. And it was actually a daily rectal enema that I had to have to be able to get my bowels to move at all. Otherwise, because of the reconstruction, I didn't have a sphincter, I didn't have nerves, I didn't have muscles to control my bowels or to even feel when I needed to go to the toilet. So I had to have these daily rectal enemas just to be able to get through. So I started in grade 1, was running around the playground, and I was asking people how their washouts were going, because it was so normal for me. And I thought everyone has washouts, so why wouldn't they? And when I started to get some weird looks from people, I realized that it actually wasn't an everybody thing, it was more a me thing. And when I found that out, and I was so young, I didn't really have the capacity to think, oh no, this is horrible, this is bad. I just thought, oh cool, like I'm different, I can tell people about it. So, you know, when you're in school and you have show and tell and, you know, you have to try and come up with a topic, I automatically had my topic. So my mum helped me create this poster, and it had in the side, I actually only found this a few weeks ago. So in that blank space, it had the diagnosis, and we called it VACTERL at that time, because the cardiac and the limb defects didn't get clumped with the others until just after I was born. So you can see here quite a lot of photos with the colostomy that was open, the scars, me being in hospital, and the differences. We did a bit of a before and after on an anatomy of how I was different. So after I gave this presentation, the first time I gave it, my mum stood with me just making sure that I was okay, but I loved it. And I told everybody, I was so proud of everything that I'd been through. I was really proud of the story that I had. And I was so excited to share it. And what I've found is that so many people worry about bullying when it comes to differences, when it comes to things like incontinence, which is what I had. But I just announced it so proudly that no one was able to think at that young age that this is something bad that I can make fun of her for. So I'd be, after these presentations, I'd be running around the school playground and some kid would come up to me and say, "Oh, can I see your scars?" I'd be like, "Sure." I'd lift up my shirt and I'd show them, and I was just so proud. How that kind of developed for me was I actually started doing some writing and writing about my birth condition because I thought that it was really interesting and I wanted to be able to share this with other people. But because it's so rare, I couldn't really meet any other people. So this was just some of the writings that I found. It has a bit of a page ripped out there, but I was really fascinated in how I was able to share my story. That basically got put on pause because up until the age of 5, I was in and out of hospital so often. And then suddenly it just seemed like a switch flicked and I was okay suddenly. And I thought, all right, this is great. I've beat the disability. I've overcome it. This was just something that you're born with and then you grow out of it. And I was always told, you know, the washouts that I had to do every day, that this would be something that you grow out of. You'll get older, everything's going to be fine. So it went from you're going to die and never live a normal life to maybe everything's just going to be okay. So I didn't really know how to take it. Because I didn't need to be near the hospital so much anymore, my family and I were able to move up to the Sunshine Coast. And up on the Sunshine Coast, I actually ended up at Montville State School. And I ended up as school captain in grade 7, which was really exciting because it was such a close community. And there were lots of people that had been at the school longer than I had that I thought were going to get it, but I very luckily did. However, just before I started grade 7, something really horrible happened with my dad. When I was about 7 years old, my parents split up and I went with my mother. So I didn't have that much contact with my dad. I'd see him every weekend or so, but we didn't really have much of a close relationship. And then I'd spent all my life in hospital with my mother by my side while my dad was trying to run our family business and provide for us. And my mum was basically my main caretaker. So after the breakup, and I started spending more and more time with dad, and we started really connecting. And it got to a point where mum and dad were on speaking terms again, and dad was going in for laser eye surgery and asked us if we could come and take him home afterwards. So we pick him up from laser eye surgery. Everything seems fine. It's just laser eye surgery in one eye. And my mum went to go donate blood and I stayed with my dad. And he said to me, "I'm really sorry, I have a headache. I need to go to bed." And I thought, of course, I was 11 years old. I thought, he's had a surgery in his eye. Of course, he's got a headache. And during that night, my dog kept leaving my bed and barking at my dad's door. And we thought, this is a bit weird. And we were going in and giving him, his medication. And everything seemed okay. He was just really tired and sleeping off the surgery. And in the morning, at 11 years of age, I went into my dad's bedroom and I saw him sitting on the side of the bed, lifting up one of his arms and dropping it. He had no use of it at all. We tried to get him up to walk downstairs and he could barely walk, and we thought, this is really strange. And he wasn't talking to us at all. And we called the laser eye surgery doctor and we said to them, what's going on? These are his symptoms. His face is a bit dropped. This seems like a stroke to us. And the doctor said, no, it's just post-surgery, relax, don't worry. And mum and I were just a bit nervous about it. So we ended up calling an ambulance. An ambulance came and they said to us, "Oh, he's probably just had a really minor stroke. We'll just take him to the hospital, we'll get everything checked out, and then he'll be home. Don't worry about it, it's okay." So dad went off in the ambulance and mum and I followed behind in our car. And by the time we got to the hospital, dad was in having a scan of his brain. And by the time he came out, we were told that 80% of his brain was affected by a major stroke and he was going to die. So my mum and I then had to try and navigate that situation. They were going to fly him down to Brisbane and remove a portion of his skull to let his brain swell. But they said that he would still be in a vegetative state, even if we did that. They could try a new experimental drug, but he'd go blind because of the laser eye surgery. And even then, he probably wouldn't be in a good way. So we just basically just held in belief that Dad would try and get through it. We just let, you know, fate take its course and just tried to be there for him in that moment. And it turned out that he spent a month in hospital and he somehow survived, just slowly, you know, getting him up, getting him walking, doing things like that. But unfortunately, his language never returned. So even now, I've been caring for him now longer than I've known him before the stroke. And it's like caring for someone that is not the father I knew. He's got a completely new identity. And it's really challenging to try and work out how to communicate. So at this stage of my life, I wasn't really focused on my own medical issues. I was focused on my dad's medical issues and going back to him with my mum to look after him. So then in all of this madness, I get school captain and I'm suddenly overwhelmed. I'm trying to look after my dad with my mum in this new situation. And all the other people in my class are incredibly jealous because they thought they would get this role. And I remember I was just trying to keep in my own bubble and just deal with what I had going on. And I had this one teacher and she said to me, she said, you need to start being proactive and start being proud of who you are and what you have achieved. And I was thinking, oh no, like just let's leave it. Let's just cruise through. And she said, no, you need to do this. And I think that really stuck with me because before then I was really quite scared to be my own person. I didn't want to upset anyone. I didn't want to rock the boat. I just wanted to kind of hide my achievements a little bit because I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. But it was that teacher that actually said that to me. And that's kind of something I think that set my course a little bit differently. So then I moved down to Brisbane for high school. And my mum and I had arranged carers to come in and look after my dad. It's now about a year after the stroke. He was living back in his house. We were going up midweek and then on the weekends to look after him and carers coming in between that. I was really scared starting high school. I still didn't really identify as a sick person or as a disabled person because I really felt like that was something that was in my past and it was something that I had overcome. And even though I still had bowel washouts, I just thought, you know, this is life, this is nothing, just get on with it. I attached, this is my grade 8 photo and my grade 10 or 11 photo, and that's my mum's name, and she actually made a little diary and she found a fortune cookie that we must have had together somewhere, and it said, you know, you will conquer all obstacles and achieve success. And I only found this book later, and it's a really good message because what actually happened I never could have expected. I was in grade 11 by this time. I'd gone through a few challenges with my health. I had recently actually seen a gynecologist, and the same way that I'd said before about needing to do that anal dilatation, I was told by the gynecologist that I was not physically able to have sex, which was, you know, looking at this young girl, you think, but you shouldn't be, like, that's ridiculous. But it was a time when a lot of my other friends were starting to get into that stuff. Girls in my grade were starting to have boyfriends, and I just felt like such an outsider that I could not physically connect with somebody and not really having that option. So I was navigating that at the same time, and I was just, you know, keeping in my lane, working really hard academically. I'm trying to fit in at a huge school when I was used to a school of 180 and I was now in a school of 800. And basically it all started to fall apart in grade 11. So in grade 11, I was under really, really high stress. I think most people at my high school were experiencing some degree of depression, anxiety, just around the pressure that we were under at school. I was kind of experiencing a bit of that. Nothing was diagnosed, nothing was really talked about. I just didn't really feel amazing. And one day I just was so upset because I had all this weight of having to look after my dad, all this stuff that was hidden. I told my friends about my disability and what was going on, but I wasn't presenting it in class anymore. I was just, I think, as most teenagers are, just wanting to fit in and wanting to be normal. I had an incident where I was home after just a night when I just cried and cried to my mother. I just said I need a day to be able to get on top of my schoolwork, to be able to get on top of all this pressure on me. And that day that I stayed home, I had someone come and try and break into my house and kick my door down. It was crazy, and I could never imagine that happening. So I had to call police and all of this, and it was just kind of adding to that bad feeling inside me. And I no longer wanted to stay home by myself because I was fearful. And it seemed like what happened next really was just, it seemed so bad at the time, but it was what needed to happen. And it was, I went back to school in term 3, and by, I think, the middle of the second week, I started feeling really sick and physically sick. I was having pain in my stomach. I was having some bowel issues. I was getting palpitations. I was dizzy. Things just weren't seeming right. So I went to my GP and she did some investigation. She couldn't really find what was wrong. She could see that I had a few different viruses, but nothing that she could really pin down as the cause of all of my symptoms. So she started sending me off to specialists. So I got sent to a gynecologist, a gastroenterologist, and a cardiologist to begin with. Because I'd had so much medical care when I was in the pediatric healthcare system, what had happened as I started to get a little bit better was I got discharged from those specialists, which meant that there was no handover from these pediatric specialists to any adult specialists. I basically entered this system with them not even having access to my medical records from when I was a child. As at that stage, they were all paper-based records. They weren't scanned into a computer unless you try and do an access for information request. And I had to try and educate my doctors from scratch. So my gynecologist found that I had recurrent ovarian cysts that were quite large, that were causing pain. But she also really figured out that I needed to do something about this whole not being able to have sex thing, as she actually was the person that dealt with the pediatrics going to adulthood of the surgeon that did my reconstruction when I was little. So she started me on a process called vaginal dilatation, and she said that I needed to be on it for about 2 years, and it was going from the capacity of smaller than my little finger to a normal person size. So I was starting to try and do that and get through while trying to manage the rest of my health stuff. The cardiologist could see some palpitations but couldn't pin anything down. I seemed to have recurrent UTIs, and I was sent to a urologist, and the urologist couldn't find my urethral opening. I had to have some further surgery, and it was just all these little things were coming up, but nothing big that could explain what was going on with me. And it got to a stage where I was just so exhausted, I couldn't even sit up for more than 5 or 10 minutes. I lost all my muscle. I had been going to the gym 2 hours a day, and all of a sudden I could barely even exercise. It just was a really hard experience. And I was seeing all these people and I was just not getting any answers. So it reached a tipping point where I needed to decide what I was going to do with my future. Because I'd always been surrounded by medical things, I'd always wanted to become a doctor. But I realized that I'm not well enough to become a doctor. I'm not well enough to not alone get through the studies, but to actually be in a hospital environment where there are people that are contagious, or where people are relying on me to save their life when I may not be able to be there that day, or where I may need to rush out, or where I may pass out or not be able to do something. I was told by my school that I didn't really have that many options, because I'd now missed a term of grade 11, which was such a crucial time. And they said, look, you can either repeat your entire year, you can do staggered subjects and graduate a year after all your peers, or you can leave. And I just thought high school is unbearable enough as it is. I do not want to do an extra year of this. So I just thought, okay, whatever, I'll drop out. So I went from a straight A student to a high school dropout. And my last completed year of education is year 10. I love to tell people I'm a high school dropout so they can just judge whatever they want freely, even though there is obviously medical basis for this. So instead, I went on to Griffith College, which is Griffith's pathway program to Griffith University. And they were the only ones that were accepting domestic students. And my family business that my parents started in 1995 was in international education and helping international students to study. So my mum had the knowledge to be able to place me in a program that would be able to set me up for university success. And if it wasn't really for that business and that knowledge, I probably wouldn't have found this path as well. So excuse the proof only. I did not like how I looked in these photos, so I did not want to pay for them. I graduated from Griffith College, which was called QIBT back then, with the Darks Award. So I got a GPA of 6.63 out of 7. And I was completing these studies the same time as I was basically lying in bed trying to stay alive and going in between doctor's appointments and still looking healthy, even though I felt like crap. And it was just an incredible achievement for me because I graduated on the exact same night that my year 12 cohort graduated, which is just uncanny. But in this environment, I was suddenly tossed in to an environment with all adult learners and where you had to really be responsible for your own study. So from this, I had an offer to do nursing at Griffith, and I also had an offer to do business at UQ. I did not really know what one I wanted to do because I wasn't sure if I could really go down the medicine path. I didn't really want to have a generic business degree because it just felt like everyone was going into business degrees at that time when they didn't really know what to do. So I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to give something else a go. And my mom was horrified because I deferred my offers without consulting her, and she's an education representative, so this is very important to her. So I basically came to this thought. There are people less qualified than you doing the things you want to do simply because they decide to believe in themselves. And this whole dropping out of school thing, this next step that I was going to take, it was not the easy solution. It was actually me taking a massive bet on myself and taking a huge leap of faith. So I decided that I loved fashion and I wanted to do a fashion business. A few years before that, I'd done a modeling course, which I thought may be a model. So I'd done a modeling course and I'd gone to the agency afterwards, and they had been looking at signing me. And they asked as like a last final tick off question, do you have any scars? I said, yeah, of course. You know, at this time, still not feeling like scars were anything to be ashamed of. I lifted up my shirt, showed them my scars, and they just sat me down. They said, like, look, honey, to be honest with you, you can do modeling, but you can never show your stomach ever. I know that it says that there's diversity and that, you know, there's Photoshop, but we don't want to see it. We can't send you to a casting in your bikini and have them see that. You know, it's just not going to happen. We'll sign you and you can do X, Y, Z, but not being able to show your stomach will cut out a huge chunk of that work. So I left that room and I thought, you know what? I'm not going to do it at all. Like, that's ridiculous. Why would I want to do something when I can't accept my body for what it is and can't accept my scars for the journey that I've been on with them? So instead of doing modeling, I decided maybe fashion was a better choice. So what I did was I did not do home ec apart from one term in grade 8. And I just started sewing and sewing things. I started beading like intricate designs on clothes, and I put them all together to sell to my friends. And I took photos in each of them as like a little lookbook that then I attached to each coat hanger. It went really, really well. It was a great success. It was a good time. I had an experience running an event. I had an experience creating a lookbook. I had experience kind of designing and altering clothes. And it was a really exciting opportunity for me. But to be honest, I still just wanted to be that model. And the biggest joy in this whole situation was taking those photos for that lookbook. So still, my health wasn't great. I was going in and out of hospital. And it just so happened, I'd just gotten out of hospital. I was really sick, and I remember being in the bathroom so sick and picking up my phone, and all of a sudden I see this ad for this modeling casting come up on my Facebook feed. I hadn't liked any modeling agency pages because I was so embarrassed about my rejection when I really rejected myself. There was no reason for this ad to come up. I wasn't even really Googling things. So it came up, and it was exactly a week away from that date. And I thought, you know what, let's try, let's go for it. I went to the modeling casting. I did not say a word about my scars. I walked really confidently in my bikini. I talked, I showed them my book with my lookbook photos in. So I had like a mini fake portfolio. And I got a message 2 days later saying that they'd offered me a development contract, which was so exciting. And then basically I just kind of made it my mantra to say yes to everything. I wasn't super confident as a person, but I found that the whole fake it till you make it thing was really working out for me, that I just felt like I was stepping into a persona and I could step into that model persona, do the jobs, be that really extroverted person. And then I could step back into kind of what I see as my like off-duty self, which is quite introverted and not really like showy, I guess, more natural. And yeah, so I decided to go for it and say yes to everything. So I was saying yes to every single job I was offered. And within the first month of my 3-month contract, I was offered a 12-month extension because they were so impressed by how much work I did and how well I did. So then within a few months, there were castings for runways. And one of those runways, this is a photo from Undress Runways, which is a sustainable runway that I was so excited to get chosen for. And I also cast for Sunshine Coast Fashion Festival, which was another thing that I really, really, really wanted to do, but thought that after having that experience where I was told that I couldn't show my scars, that I probably couldn't do the Sunshine Coast Fashion Festival because it's going to be full of bikinis. Anyway, after getting signed, I went to this casting. I did my walk. I'd practiced over and over and over up and down the hallway. I went, I did it, and I got a call back and they booked me for the show. And I was completely excited, overwhelmed. I just could not believe that I'd gotten to this point. I was literally a child that had booked a regional fashion festival. It was not a huge deal, but to me, it just meant the world. Anyway, for this is a photo New Year's Eve 2015 going into 2016. And I put this here because it was a major turning point for me. How I'd really gotten to modeling and progressed so far was really through realizing who I am, having belief in myself, and also things like visualization and affirmations. I could not stop visualizing. I would do it all the time. So I had this beautiful night, Sydney. I was on this rooftop of this $12 million apartment. I had no idea how I ended up here. It was like my godmother's friend in her 50s had this apartment and invited me. Like, it was just, I just couldn't even believe that I was there in the first place. And I thought visualization. But after this, I thought, okay, what am I going to do for 2016? I want to make an impact. I want to level up. I've been modeling for a few months now. It's now time for me to take it to the next level if I want to do anything serious. So I went back, it was after midnight, I was sitting in bed, I was tired, and I was writing down my goals. And I wrote down walk Fashion Week, like Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week in Europe. That was it. That's what I wanted to do. I told my mum and she was like, ha ha ha, like, are you sure? You know, it was, to everyone, it was a joke, and not in a mean way, but for a small time Brisbane girl, when there are millions of gorgeous girls in the world, to suddenly somehow get over to Fashion Week in Europe, especially being with a smaller boutique agency, it just seemed like it was impossible. Anyway, so my mum decided that she wanted to go to Amsterdam for an Open Minds conference because that's really what she was into. So I decided to, you know, go on the trip with her and hijack it a little bit. And I sent my digitals, which are the no makeup basic photos, over to an agency there. I met up with them. The photo of me holding that book is the photo of me going to the casting with them. They took all my measurements, they took photographs, they watched runway walks, they looked through my portfolio, and they told me they'd let me know. We were only there for 10 days. So by day, I think 2 after the modeling casting, I got an email saying that they wanted to sign me. I was over the moon. I could not believe that this was happening. It did not seem real. And I knew that I was going to have to work so hard to cut it, because Europe is a whole different ballgame than little old Brisbane. And I just decided that I should really take the opportunity. And I was there and I was kind of waiting for that real contract to be sent through, because it only said yes in an email, but I hadn't signed anything. And it was 3 days before my flight was due to leave. And I didn't know if I should cancel it or what I should do. And I didn't know where I was going to live, how I was going to fund this. I just had no idea what the next step was. Anyway, we met up with the conference director of the Open Minds conference that we'd actually been to. And he said to me, oh, I have an apartment in The Hague, because this was in Amsterdam. So I have an apartment in The Hague. You can come, you can stay there, you can have my room. My son lives there. I'm going to go back to my house in France. You live there, you follow your dreams. I thought, wow. And he goes, I'm not going to charge you any rent. I just want you to basically counsel and be a good influence on my son. Which was a challenge I wasn't ready for. As a 17-year-old girl, moving into a house with a 20-year-old guy that you'd never met before was a challenge. My mum and my godmother got on a flight, went back home, waved me goodbye, and I went to this guy's house with my big suitcases, and this was my new life. I still hadn't got that official contract, but thankfully it came through a few days later. And another opportunity for me to just take that chance on myself, even though it probably wasn't really a great idea. I didn't think it through, but I took the leap and it worked out really well. So these were some of the jobs I did, and I just chose these photos to talk about a few little things. So the first is my portfolio and my comp card that I'll take to castings. The second photo is a photo from before my first casting there. My first casting, I went to this big fashion center and we were putting clothes, and we had to go and stand in this room, stand dead still. When we were called, we'd walk forward and they'd all look at us from every angle, and then we'd walk back. And I was put in this pure plastic dress. And I was thinking, okay, this is fine, this is fine. And I was in this room and I was starting to feel really dizzy because I wasn't really getting good nutrition. I knew that models needed to be tiny. I was just trying to make my way in Europe. And I ended up blacking out twice. And they were so used to it, they gave me sugar pills straight away that they had, because they knew girls pass out all the time. They had them on hand. And I realized then that I don't know if this industry is actually the best thing for my health. That other photo are photos of bruises that I had. And I had bruises because I went to go see my agent and they wrote down my measurements. Then they wrote arrows and they wrote what they wanted my measurements to be. And I said to them, how can I get my waist size and my hip size down further? You can barely grab anything off me. How can I do that? And they said, professional hula hooping, which is something I never thought I would be doing. So I bought a professional exercise hula hoop, which is weighted and it has like little things like that on it. And you just hula hoop and hula hoop and hula hoop until you lose that fat off your waist and your hips. So those were bruises from this hula hoop with these weights and smashing against me as I was just trying so hard to be able to fit into this size and this ideal model size that they wanted me to be able to succeed. These were my digitals at the time. It was really, really an exciting time despite what I just said. There were different agencies that they were connected with around the globe. There were lots of cool possibilities. And I was just, you know, all my friends back in Australia thought I was living the dream over there. But I was basically quite isolated in an apartment, traveling, you know, 2 to 3 hours by public transport to get to these castings. And it was like catch a bus to get on a train, to get on a metro, to get on a different train. And it was a lot of work, and I didn't have a SIM card. I didn't even think to organize one. So I would basically not have a working phone or a map or anything. And I'd just walk out of the house and hope that I'd be able to return at the end of the day. So I was really taking these huge chances. I was getting cool work. This was one of the runways that I did there. And that photo that you can see down the bottom, they actually had us on these like rolling things, and they'd roll us down and then they'd roll a thing forward and you'd walk, and it was like a fashion show I'd never even seen before. And that was the plastic dress that I passed out in last time. And I was so terrified that I was going to pass out again. So you can see I'm a bit lumpy in my bust there because I thought that crystals would be able to stop me from passing out. So I'd put some in my bra just with good luck and healing, because I thought I need anything to help me get through this, because I genuinely thought I was going to pass out again. And thankfully made it through. It was okay. It went well. You can see there my crazy hair that was teased up, brushed out, ripped to shreds and teased up again. it was certainly an experience, and it was not as glamorous as I thought it would be, but I was still loving it and really happy that I was there. This is some of the other work I did for one of the glasses companies, and I did a video on making a cocktail when I was 17. I was going to lots of castings, getting work. It was a great experience, but it was a big learning experience, and it was an experience of really trying to work stuff out for myself. I had to source glycerol that I had to use for my bowel washouts. I had to source it in this totally different country just to be able to medically function in this environment too. So there are a lot of considerations and a lot of things at play. These are some photos that I had to send to my modeling agent, and I wanted to just tell you the story about what happened here. Here, I was given a call and I was told that there was an agency in India that really, really wanted to book me. And they videoed me, I talked to them on Skype, I showed them my body, I showed them my face, they were happy. And then all of a sudden I get this message, send me through a photo of the side of your face with no makeup and send me through a close-up photo of your scalp. So I was like, okay, that's fine. So I sent through these photos. Not the greatest photos, but they were just the basic things that they needed. I was then given a call, and I still semi-suspect that the scar had something to do with it, but wanted to highlight that it didn't look that severe, really. They called me and they said, I'm so sorry, but it looks like they're going to cancel you because your face is too fat. I was like, okay, all right, we'll see. And then I get another call and they're like, yep, they've cancelled you, your face is too fat. And this was like 10 days before I was supposed to fly to India for 3 months out of the blue. And then I get a third call from my agent. She's like, look, you need to start doing some facial exercises. You need to start eating foods where you have to chew a lot. You just have to lose this baby weight off your face. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen for you. So I was just over in the side of the country by myself, trying to like navigate this whole housemate situation where I was trying to help someone that had a lot of addictions, and actually I found out was like physically pushing around his mother, and that's why he had to live in this place. So I was there to try and help him out of that. So I was not really in a very safe situation, and I had a lot that I was trying to process. But at the end of the day, I was just fighting to try and get to Fashion Week. So I got there. I worked really hard. I went to the castings, and this was my debut at Fashion Week. I had these heels that were literally a steel nail drilled into the heel with no grip at the bottom, and a leather crocodile jumpsuit. And I did it, and it was incredible. It was a huge, huge show. It was for the designer that was the top designer of Fashion Week in Amsterdam that year. And it was just such a memorable and incredible experience. And you can see there that halfway through walking down, my jumpsuit unclipped itself, and I had luckily black underwear underneath. So my Fashion Week debut was my jumpsuit busting open, but I still made the most of it, kept walking and kept going. And I think that's basically a mantra for my life, just pushing through situations that may not be ideal. When I came back to Brisbane, I tried to just keep working as much as I could. I genuinely thought that I would fly back to Amsterdam because I had another job that was booked. But by the time I got to Brisbane, I just kind of realized the experience that I'd been through, and I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to jump back into that so soon. I thought that maybe I'd give it 1 or 2 months and then go back. So these were some photos of some things that I did. The top 2 photos are a fashion show I did in Sydney. And it had such a huge audience. It was this massive, I think, Chinese delegation or something that came. Really cool job. The one on the side is from Townsville. I met a lovely local designer, and her and some of her designer friends flew me up. Those were her silk painted leggings that she had made. And then down the bottom is a shoot I did in Melbourne, and that was for a magazine with Sass and Bide. So things seemed to be going well. It was exciting. I basically just hustled and hustled and hustled. I chased every opportunity. I didn't give up. I just worked really, really hard. And then came this day. I remember taking these photos and thinking that I was just so upset because I just sent photos of myself in bikinis back to my agent, and she'd come back to me and she just said, look, I'm really, really sorry, but you're just too big for modeling now. That's for fashion, you're too big, your hips are too big, your waist's a bit too big. You need to lose it. And she said, like, I know that you can't really lose it because that's how you're built, but this is too big, I'm sorry. So my dream of going over to Amsterdam again kind of crushed. I knew that there was no way that I could really get smaller than this, no amount of starvation, no amount of exercise, because I was already doing that when I was over there. And this was only 2 centimeters more. So like this much distributed around your body, it's not much. And I just thought, like, what am I doing? You know, this isn't healthy for me anymore. And I thought, I'd been so invested in that vision. I'd done so much visualization. I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I suddenly had that dream crushed and had to try and work out what my next step was. What industry am I going to go into? What job am I going to do? How am I going to make money? I had to start, paying my own rent. I had to work out what job am I going to get to do that. The retail jobs, the kind of Coles jobs, I wasn't getting any callbacks because I was, 18 with no experience. And I ended up thinking, okay, what other field basically your earning potential and your success is just marked by how hard you work rather than capped at a certain amount. And I'd always liked houses and interiors. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a go at real estate. So I start doing real estate and it was awesome, actually. I really loved it. I ended up getting on board as a second receptionist. I wasn't even reception number 1. I was reception number 2. And I'd even studied my salesperson certificate. I was all ready. And within a month of being there, I got the Top Achiever of the Month award for property management. And I was the receptionist, the second receptionist. So it was another just reaffirming to myself that whatever I put my mind to, I would succeed at. And I was just working so hard. Before that, though, I had a hospital admission in January and I had a second hospital admission in February where out of the blue, I had anaphylaxis to penicillin and my throat closed up, I blacked out, blah, blah, blah. I had to get rushed into hospital and had adrenaline and managed to, be okay again. But what they realized was that because when I was little, I was on those prophylactic antibiotics to try and keep me well, they actually completely sort of destroyed my reaction to it. It was just overexposure. So overexposure to latex, I've got anaphylaxis, and overexposure to penicillin. So this was in hospital after that anaphylaxis reaction. And I just thought, what's going on with my body? It just seems like something just isn't right. So this was something that was happening in between. Got out of hospital, went back to work. I was really excelling. I designed this billboard. I was doing a lot more than what a receptionist would. I took over their social media. I was doing all their rental applications. I was doing their sales contracts, their marketing, everything, just because I really, really loved what I was doing. And I thought that this was my new career and this was my new thing that I was visualizing. Unfortunately, it all came semi-crashing down again. And just like when it had come crashing down in school, and at that time it seemed like it was such a horrible, bad thing to happen, it felt like it was happening again, and I didn't really know if this was going to turn out so positive this time. So when I had been in hospital in February with that anaphylaxis, they had taken a swab and got their results back showing that I had an infection, a pelvic infection. And by the time it got to March, I went back to my doctor. She said there was something not right, go into the hospital. I went into the hospital, they gave me an ultrasound and they saw that my fallopian tube had turned into an abscess of 9.5 by 4.5 centimeters. So quite large by that stage. I'd had an ultrasound in February where everything was fine. And I only found out that they actually knew that I had that infection in February, yet nobody called me, nobody told me. So I wasn't able to get treatment for it until it was at this stage. I was in hospital, I was on IV antibiotics for about a week, and then they said, look, this is not shrinking at all. Let's remove it. We need to get this out of your body. It's not right. So I thought, okay, this was my first sort of bigger surgery when I was more adult and more aware of things. And I got taken in and I had no idea really what was going to happen. And I came out and I had little laparoscopic incisions. And I said to the surgeons, you know, what happened? How did it go? And they said, we opened you up and everything was scar tissue. Your abdominal wall was plastered to your bowel, was plastered to your uterus, was plastered to your major arteries, to your heart, to your kidney, to your legs. Everything was stuck together. They said, we looked at it and we had to sew you back up. That's it. We couldn't touch it. They said, we're going to try and manage it conservatively, because if we go in, there's a high chance you're going to come out of this with a colostomy from bowel injury, from us trying to dissect things. If we accidentally nick the ureter to your kidney, you've got a single kidney, that would compromise the kidney, you'd need to be on a transplant list. It was all of these factors where I thought that I was fine, and then I thought I was just the girl with a bit of a pelvic infection, and all of a sudden I had this situation that I had to try and deal with. So I thought, okay, we'll just not deal with that at the moment. I'll just go back to work and just try and push through. They're not going to be able to operate. I'll just try and push through it as much as I can. I was still modeling at that time. This runway in Brisbane gave me this top model kind of designation. And so this is me with one of the other models, and we were going down to shoot this magazine in Byron Bay. So this is me with a huge abscess in my stomach still, just working and trying to push through as much as I could, which I would not recommend and I do not endorse at all. But of course, it ended up with me in hospital again. This was my 19th birthday that I spent in hospital. I still had this abscess. I was on a lot of morphine, basically just trying to keep this pain under control. I went in and I tried to have that abscess drained, but when they went to drain it, it just was unsuccessful. I was awake. I could see this huge needle going into my stomach trying to fix this situation. And the growth was just expanding and expanding and expanding. So then finally it gets to July. So the first surgery was April, and July, I couldn't go on any longer. They had to take the risk and do the surgery. I had no idea what to expect. Again, kidney transplant, colostomy bag, huge laparotomy incision. I did not know how I was going to wake up. I was terrified. The surgery was 5.5 hours long. They dissected everything perfectly somehow. 3 little laparoscopic incisions. But by this time, from the ultrasound, it looked like this lump had grown to be 10 by 13 centimeters. It was protruding from my abdomen. And by the time they actually were able to get in to operate, it had crushed my ovary, and my ovary was completely dead. So they removed the lump and they removed my ovary, and I was basically just recovering. And the days after surgery, I felt horrible. I felt like I was going to die, even though I knew that everything went well and I was okay and I wasn't going to. All my veins had collapsed. So I had cannulas in both of my feet when I woke up, as well as little dots all over me where they'd tried to cannulate me in other areas. They'd given me antibiotics and found that I had 4 more antibiotic reactions because of overexposure. So a lot of things were just becoming more complicated and more dangerous for me. And I just didn't understand how this thing that I thought was like I'm just a kid and I'm going to grow out of it. And then, oh, it's just a hiccup in high school that made you sick, to suddenly this thing's actually seeming to be pretty chronic. And it seems like it is going to affect the rest of your life, I realized. So I realized I couldn't continue in real estate. I went back to work after this surgery. I was supposed to take 6 weeks off. I took 3 weeks off, and I went back there to try and do my job. I wanted to get a promotion to a sales assistant. It looked like it was in reach. My boss had said, you know, the reason why you haven't had this earlier is because you're new to the industry and you're young. Doesn't seem to work that way for males, I've found. But they said I was too young and I didn't have enough experience in the industry. I get back to work, they take me into my boss's office and he goes, so if you were selling a house and that whole hospital thing happened, you wouldn't have been able to sell the house. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, okay, so this is probably a good time for me to tell you, we've actually hired this other girl to come in and be sales assistant. She was previously working as a casual at Woolies. She doesn't have a salesperson certificate, so we're getting her at a like trainee rate. She's never worked in real estate before, but she's taking the job that you were going to have. So that was like a huge hit. And I was sitting at that reception desk, like in so much pain because I just had surgery. And I thought, what am I doing? Yet again, I'm sacrificing my health for something that does not support or sustain me. So my mum, thankfully, in the business that she had, invited me to come on board as manager. So I got a good pay rise in comparison to what I was earning, which was crumbs in real estate. I got a pay rise and I had the freedom to try and manage this business that I'd basically grown up in since I was, born. I was lying on the floor of the office listening into the conversation. So I had a natural understanding of what the business was about. So I joined the team, renovated the entire office, painted all the walls myself, ripped up all the carpets, project coordinated the entire thing, and then went into a managerial role where I was trying to oversee finances, where I was learning this business, where people's lives were in my hands in terms of like their future and coming to the country and their study choices and getting them out of tricky situations. And I'd always sworn that I'd never work for my family business, but I found myself in this situation because I realized that I do not have enough sick leave to even cover my specialist appointments, because by this time I was seeing even more specialists at the hospital to just try and get everything under control. Then this is all in the period of a year since this first surgery to now starting real estate to this photo. I was still having this pain after surgery. I went back to my gynecologist and I said, look, I've got really bad pain. You need to do something. Something's wrong. And he was saying, look, nothing can go wrong this 3 months after surgery. We've just been in there. Everything's fine. We tied it up. It's all good. And I said, no, something's wrong. So he booked me for an ultrasound at the hospital. I came in and the lady scanned me for about 30 seconds. And I thought, okay, great. This lady's just going to dismiss me. She can't find anything. They're going to just say it's post-surgical pain, blah, blah, blah. And she said, go out, sit in the waiting room. I said, okay. So I'm out in the waiting room and I get a call from my surgeon. And my surgeon says, look, we've found an 8-centimeter growth in your single remaining ovary. We don't know what it is. We need to admit you to hospital. We're going to try and do emergency surgery, but first we need to make sure it's not cancerous because it doesn't look great. So out of the blue, from things seemingly being normal yet again, my world was turned upside down. I went straight down to hospital. I called my mum and I just burst into tears and I said, Mum, it's all happening again. I've just lost one ovary. I'm going to lose my next one. And as a person, I've always been someone that's really wanted to have children. So I thought this was just so sad for me. And my hormones since the first ovary came out was so up and down. I was so emotional. I did not want to have to go through something like that again and go into hormone replacement therapy. And I certainly didn't want to have ovarian cancer. So I got to the ward. They did all of my tumor markers. They thankfully came back clear. So my surgeon came with me down to have another ultrasound to see the exact positioning of the growth. Then he booked in an emergency theatre, brought in everybody after hours to operate on me at 10 p.m. that night to remove the growth. And thankfully he was able to save my ovary. He's literally my savior. It was such a crazy time. But I finally met this amazing surgeon who, when he saw me and saw my medical history, he literally cried because he recognized, you have been through so much. You have been through all of these surgeries. You're alive. Even though you're sick right now, you look healthy. You've got such good prospects for your life. And it was really in this interaction and having all of these really hard experiences that year in 2017 that made me think, what are other people with my condition doing? Are there any other VACTERL people out here? Are there any other people who are incontinent? Are there any other people who understand what I'm going through? And so I ended up going onto Facebook and I looked up some support groups and I found some VACTERL ones and I was thinking, wow, this is pretty cool. So I was just watching, what's going on. I was a bit too shy to post. And then eventually one day I thought, you know what, let's just give it a go. So I did a little intro about me and how I'm affected. And I was like, look, I just had a big surgery, but this is me a year before walking Fashion Week, literally 1 year before this huge surgery. And everyone just blew up, comments, likes. Everyone was like, oh my God, you're giving me hope for my child. Wow, this is incredible. Keep going. And I suddenly was like, oh, maybe my story has a little bit of power to it. Maybe I could help people with this instead of trying to or force myself to be normal and force myself to fit into this cookie cut that I thought that I should fit into. I should actually just try and, again, find my own path and see where this takes me, and actually reflect on what I was like as a child, how resilient I was, that I was presenting with posters at like 5 about my condition, that I was writing things down. And I came in contact with this amazing guy in Melbourne, and he started a foundation for people born with imperfect anus and anorectal malformation, which is the A part of my condition. So his foundation flew me down to Melbourne and put me on their resource development team to consult with other people. And this was the first time when I was really, really little, I met some other kids that had VACTERL, because there was some born in a cluster around the same time as I was, but I hadn't met anyone for so many years. So this was the first time meeting someone that gets me. And I would say things to him and he would just be like, yeah, like I understand that completely. And it was my first time having that with someone that just knows how you feel and what you experience without you having to speak it. So this was us at the Children's Hospital for our meeting. And I went into this meeting that day and I met these mothers of other children with imperfect anus, not the whole VACTERL, just that one part. And these mothers cried. They hugged me. They did not want to let go, because they just thought, oh my God, my daughter might be okay. My son might be okay. Maybe this isn't the end of their life. Maybe they're not going to always be the smelly kid. Maybe they're not always going to be unlovable or unattractive or whatever else that we place on people with disabilities. They suddenly felt a sense of peace. And I was like, I should probably do something about this. I should try and help more. This is actually what makes me happy. Like, I can be myself and I can make a difference at the same time. So I came down to Melbourne again a few weeks later, and these photos are about an hour apart. I was just about to go to the airport. I had another lovely meeting at the hospital, met even more people. It was incredible. And I got to the airport, was just about to get on my flight. Suddenly my heart goes crazy. I've got really severe pains. I go to the desk of the flight that I was getting on, and they said, I'm really sorry, but we can't actually let you on the flight when you're this sick. And they were like, you need to go to a doctor. We'll call a doctor, book you in, and call you a taxi to get there. I was like, oh God. So I went to this doctor. The doctor's like, look, there seems to be something wrong with your heart. I don't know what it is. And also, I think maybe your appendix is about to burst. So you need to get to emergency because something weird's going on. So I went to emergency. My appendix wasn't bursting. They didn't find anything with my heart. They didn't know what was going on because they could not access my medical records from Brisbane. So they were just trying to play guessing games. They didn't want to do a CT scan and expose me to more radiation. So they basically just wanted to get me stable enough to get on a flight back home to my real doctors. So they got me stable enough. I got on a flight. I went back home. And it also, again, reinforced to me that, you know, I'm not always going to be either of these girls on this screen. I'm both of them. I'm the, modelly advocate. I'm also the sick girl sometimes. And it just is what it is. And it is about also having that sense of that like vulnerability and that realness and not trying to pretend everything's okay all the time when it isn't. This is when I got back home. I went back into hospital. This was my 1-year anniversary with my first ever like long-term boyfriend. And I spent it in hospital with a bowel blockage. So that was pretty sexy, but anyway. And then so I was in hospital again, my world turned upside down. I was being fed 2.5 liters of bowel prep a day, the prep that they give to people before a colonoscopy when you literally just like lock yourself to the toilet. They gave me 2.5 liters with other laxatives for 10 days. I did not have any output until I think day 8. And in this time, they were like, this is so severe. We're going to probably need to give you a colostomy bag. And I was like, okay. Another thing to add into the mix, it was just like even though an ostomy is a great thing, I don't have anything against it. People live amazing lives. I could probably live an amazing life. But when I had my ostomy as a baby, it wasn't good for me. I was having really bad skin erosion and a lot of issues with it. So I thought, like, just in a second, my world was changing so quickly again. And thankfully, I managed to get through without needing to have that ostomy made at that stage. But they basically said, you know, this bowel prep and these washouts that you've been doing them since you were 1 year old, and nobody has changed the formula, and you're now 19. So that was just ridiculous. Like, they're trying to refer me back to my pediatric surgeons because they didn't know what to do. And magically, I somehow fell into this clinic at a totally different hospital, and they introduced me to a new bowel management and colonic irrigation system that I now have to use just to be able to function daily. It's a 1 litre system, and I'm still told that eventually they're going to have to remove my entire large bowel and do a colostomy, because that's just how my body is, because I don't have any of those natural contractions. So coming out of all of these experiences, I realized it was time to finally write my book. I thought my story needs to be told. I'm going to get it out there. Like, I have a lot to say. My story isn't a sad story. It's a story of overcoming obstacles. It's a story of believing in myself, even when the evidence kind of suggests that I probably shouldn't have. So this is a photo of where I actually stayed up writing my book. It was beautiful. It was up in Nambour, actually, at my godmother's place. It had a nice little view. And I was up until 4:30 a.m. and then I was working full time, and then up during the night writing. And this Polaroid is I think a few minutes before I actually submitted my book to the publisher. So very exciting and huge new times for me. At the same time, things were going really well with my parents' business, and I was actually loving it. This is my mum and I, and we just won an award from Central Queensland University for service excellence because we were doing so well. And it was just beautiful to be able to actually be back in this thing that my parents created, and that my father was working in before his stroke. And at the same time, you know, we're caring for him, and it just felt like I was really kind of coming back to my parents and my family doing this work, and that I was actually quite literally born into it too. But then this moment here for me was the game changer. So I'd written my book, I'd submitted it, it was waiting to be published, and I got an opportunity to go over to America, Phoenix, Arizona, to go to a conference called the Pull-Through Network Conference. Pull-Through Network is an organization in the US that was created for people that were born with anorectal malformations, so the anus is not formed properly, and they have to do the pull-through procedure, which is the kind of layman term given to that pelvic reconstruction that I had. So I presented on my story in front of 400 people, like all families of people who are affected by this. And you can see that's me presenting, and right next to that is a photo that one of the little girls with this condition drew of me, and she's even got my black dress and the earrings that I was wearing and everything in. It was so sweet. And it was just beautiful being able to meet other people and connect with them. And I suddenly felt like I had more meaning, like it was a home. And I'd never experienced that to that extent before. And then the photo down the bottom, which is a bit out of touch because I'm in a little swimsuit, but one of the people there that was born with my condition is a really well-known fashion photographer in America. So she was there and she's like, we should shoot. And so we shot. It was like all this stuff was just aligning. And I made these friends in those 3 or 4 days that I was at this conference that are like people who genuinely understand my life and have lived it too in some parallel. And it was such a special connection. I speak to them so often now, even though we've only known each other in person for a few days, it feels like just some incredible bond that we share. So after speaking and doing that, I realized that a lot of people are experiencing a lot of shame about the condition still. A lot of people are keeping it secret from everybody else. So I thought, okay, if I, as this model who can walk on a catwalk in Europe wearing a little leather leotard, cannot speak confidently about what's going on in my life, then how can I expect the girl that locks herself in her room, doesn't leave, and is so ashamed to do it? You know, like, I need to take one for the team here. I need to sacrifice my own privacy for the benefit of other people. So I contacted the Continence Foundation of Australia. I didn't think that I would end up having a claim to fame as the like incontinent young person of Australia, but I'm now their youth ambassador, and I've shared my story in their quarterly magazine quite a few times, now twice, 2 stories and 2 covers, which has been so lovely. And I've been working with the Continence Foundation quite closely, and it's just been so rewarding, and having people from all walks of life, people that are ex-military, mums, everyone from all different places that experience incontinence and feel like they cannot speak about it. It's estimated between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 Australians experience incontinence, which is accidental leakage of bowel or bladder. But we're all too scared to talk about it because we're worried it will make it uncomfortable or it's be smelly or be gross. But I realized if it's something that you can't control, why should you be ashamed of it, really? So I started going down this more advocacy direction. My book finally came out. I had a lovely book launch. I called it Behind the Smile because I thought everyone sees me as someone that's smiling and someone that's healthy, but there's actually a lot behind that. And about it being a journey really from that disability to ability, transforming things that I thought would be setbacks and things that I wasn't supposed to survive into just a real passionate drive to keep going and just to pursue my dreams fearlessly and live each moment like it was my last, I guess. So from there, I was teaching runway at schools. I was presenting and hosting events. I was just trying to throw myself into everything that I possibly could. I went to the youth conference with the Continence Foundation and I was able to meet all these people, and just standing next to that poster wearing white pants, which is my little kind of joke as an incontinent person, because everyone's very scared. I'm like, well, I'll wear the white pants and take my, you know. So I had all these people come up to me and they'd just kind of usher me over. They'd be like, oh, I experience incontinence too. And I was like, well, excellent. How is it for you? What's happening? Like, what's going on? And it was just having that vulnerability and that connection that all these people suddenly started opening up to me. And I went from having these really shallow relationships to these relationships that were so deep and so much about connection. Still, I realized, okay, modeling wasn't healthy for me, but I can actually pick and choose what jobs I want to do. And it's important for me to still be out there showing my scars, being proud of my body, regardless of how big or how little it is, and being an example and an ambassador for people with disability or with differences. So this was at the Sunshine Coast Fashion Festival that I walked once again. We had to walk along that tiny little platform. It was a little bit scary, and then jump over those little fountains, but an amazing experience nonetheless. This then led us to Pakistan. So every experience that I had, it was just somehow linked and woven in. So we went over to Pakistan to launch one of the offices for our business. I was able to meet all these wonderful people. I did interviews with students. We went to different universities. It was like such a cool experience. But the main reason I went over there was because my mum was sitting on a flight next to this lady, and they started talking. And she says, oh, I'm a gynecologist at this university in Pakistan, like a university and hospital. Mum goes, oh, my daughter has so many gynecology issues. They start talking and talking, and then all of a sudden I'm invited as a guest speaker to this international conference over in Pakistan to present to a gynecology seminar of gynecologists and like obstetricians. I'm not a clinical person. I always wanted to study medicine, but finally I was able to share my perspective as a patient and have that valued. So this was over there at that conference, and it was just such a magical experience. I came back home. Things were just taking off. Like, I was making connections at the Continence Foundation, or I went to the youth conference and met someone else there. And I was presenting at especially the educational and medical blends, where how you can accommodate students with chronic illness or disability better into education so they don't end up having to drop out like I did. Even though it worked out well for me, the education system should be able to actually adapt for people with differences and disability. So just presenting and really loving it and meeting incredible people and actually being able to influence change. This then led me to another grand adventure. And this grand adventure was Miss Grand Australia. It was the 3rd largest pageant in Australia. I thought being a model could very easily transfer over to being a pageant girl, but I tell you, it's completely different. Different walk, different talk, different style. I trained really hard. I made it through states, and then I went to nationals, and I got 1st runner-up in Australia when there were all these other people that had been doing pageants for years or held international titles. And it was another tribute to just how hard I worked. And throughout that entire experience, I stayed true to who I was and advocated for people with chronic illness and disability. And when I was up on that stage, and it sounds so corny, but I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it as a representation to other people that it's possible, a representation of our community, a representation that disabled people can still be beautiful, can still achieve, can still beat the odds. And yes, I was sharing a room with someone. I had no idea who they were while trying to do my bowel flushes at night. Like, there were a lot of health things I had to navigate here as well, but you just push through and you keep going, and it paid off for me, which I was very fortunate. So after this, all of a sudden, the media articles started rolling in, and I was like, what? It just didn't make sense to me. And of course, even though, Fashion Week and the book and the pageant, the most excited by this girl that has no control over her bowels. So it was all over the Daily Mail, The Independent, Mamma Mia, Nine Honey, disability magazines, radio interviews with Triple J, with like health radio stations. It was just incredible. And I was finally getting my word out there. And I really had to just stop for a moment and release any hint of that shame that I still had left, any hint that I didn't accept myself for who I am. And I just thought, you know what? They can take it or they can leave it. But the difference that I'm making to another person who has some vulnerability, or who has, incontinence or disability, or has been told they can't do something, it's worth it for them. So then I got selected for my first keynote presentation, which was so exciting. It was for the HELP conference with Ronald McDonald House. I just went through the abstract process like everybody else. I wasn't expecting too much. I just wrote my abstract, in spare 10 minutes at work, sent it off without proofreading, thought, okay, I'll be fine. Like, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And I got selected as a keynote, and I was able to share my story of how the education pathway went for me as someone with a disability, and how people could actually better cater for that. And through that, I actually was able to connect with all these incredible people and organizations and services that were actually doing a lot in this space. And I can assure you that my experience that I had in my educational journey is not going to be the experience that's carried on by other people. This then led to going down to the National Conference on Incontinence, and I presented there, and it was incredible. All these health professionals that meet people with incontinence every day, and being able to impact change through them. And just having that opportunity to share that patient perspective and share that care perspective in a space that's usually more scientific or medical professional oriented. And this was, again, the Perth Children's Hospital has their own school, and they actually hired me to present for an hour at their professional development, so I could explain to them how my education had been affected and how they could better adapt and accommodate for people with illness. I went back to Pakistan. We opened up our second office. I was there in another city. My mum was there too, but we were in separate cities. I was navigating a totally different culture and environment. We opened our second office. I was meeting with the College of Law. I was meeting with universities to try and make these connections. And I was realizing that I always thought that I could only have one career or have one thing. But what I was actually doing was I was following all of my passions simultaneously, and that it wasn't necessarily about choosing one thing. It was about choosing the life that I wanted and then creating that for myself. I was actually walking through one of the villages, and all of these people suddenly swarmed around me and they handed me their babies, and it was just so beautiful, like the most incredible experience that I can't even describe. And then I also had an opportunity to deliver a keynote at this conference. This here was actually at the welcoming event with the health minister for the whole of Pakistan. And I wasn't set to speak at this welcoming event. And I got a tap on the shoulder, and one of the people said, okay, can you give a 2-minute elevator speech on why we need to involve patients in service design and blah, 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 blah. You have no paper or pen or anything, just go. And so I had to suddenly present in front of the health minister of Pakistan on a second's notice about the importance of involving patients in service design and influencing how we can actually make it a more safe environment for patients. Then as my actual keynote, I had the opportunity to present on more of the trauma-informed practice with treating patients, because it was about patient safety, but I don't have the clinical knowledge to say, don't, reuse like vaccinations or whatever. I only had the knowledge to speak from my experience. So I was teaching them how they could better cater for the patient and respect them, show them, respect their dignity, and communicate with them better. And that really was great for that audience and another incredible opportunity. And I was the only patient ever to speak at this international conference. And I'm really proud because it was able to create space for other people with patient experiences to share what they have been through and what their thoughts are moving forward. So I came back home yet again from Pakistan, and I had 5 admissions within, I think, 3 or 4 months for urinary tract infections with my single kidney. Unfortunately, I was in hospital and I was told that my bacteria that I'd grown was resistant to all of these antibiotics. The ones that it wasn't resistant to, I was allergic to. And they said to me, and this was December, not last year, the year before, they said, you've probably only got 1 or 2 infections left before we'll have nothing left to treat you with. And I just suddenly had this mortality, you know, right in my face yet again, that I do not know what the future holds. And thankfully I've had, well, not thankfully, I've had more infections since then, but thankfully I've had infections since then that have been able to be treated. But it was just another confrontation that things can be going really, really brilliantly, but you're always kind of humbled, or in my situation, I'm always humbled by my adversities and by my health. And I'm so grateful that I have that humbling influence. I think I could never grow a huge ego, because I think when you're someone that like is incontinent and is like always held at the mercy of their health, it's hard to have that, I think. So what this led to was actually pursuing studies. And I'd done vocational studies in counselling and transpersonal therapy because I was very interested in medical trauma and how other people's experiences in the healthcare system has actually influenced how they have emotionally developed, their attachment theory, and how they're going to get on with life. I then really felt like I actually wanted to study further, and I enrolled in an MBA. So I was a year 10 high school dropout technically. And because of my business experience and my hard work and my good grades in my bridging program, I was able to go directly into an MBA because I've been managing a business for 3.5 years and XYZ. And so my MBA is in health services management and entrepreneurship. And what it's teaching me is it's teaching me about, you know, the national safety and quality and health standards and things like that that can actually be incorporated in my advocacy, and has allowed me to do a lot more than I thought was possible before. This is a photo that just was a trigger reminder of this turning point for me again. With all my speaking, with the media stories and everything, it was like being one little force trying to get so much change happening, but it was just one person trying to affect a larger scale change. And what I realized is if I actually use an opportunity as a consumer representative with health services, I have an opportunity to affect change on a much wider scale. So it took quite a long time to break into. I registered my interest with my local hospital, and I kept my eye out with Health Consumers Queensland. And I finally got my first opportunity in an adolescent extended treatment centre and an inclusion advisory group for naming it. So that was incredible. And then from there, I finally got engaged with the Royal, which is where I receive all of my care. And in July this year, I got put on their diversity working group. Even though I do not look like a very diverse person, as someone that's young with a disability and a carer and from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, because my family's from Denmark, I was able to bring a lot of different perspectives to that group. And since then, it's just kind of blown up. I've got, you know, national advisory groups with the Continence Foundation, with a carers organisation. I'm now in about 6 different committees or working groups at the Royal. I coordinate their consumer newsletter. It's just like I was fighting so hard to make a change by myself, but by collaborating with other people, I've been able to, you know, make changes that will affect the 55,000 people that go through the outpatients department in a month in a hospital. So that was a huge turning point for me. Once again, held at the mercy of my health quite shortly after. This was in August this year, last year, it's 2021 now. I went in to have my stomach wrapped around the base of my esophagus because I was having very severe reflux that was going into my lungs and drowning me at night, which was really horrible. So I went in, they did the surgery. I thought everything was great. I thought I'd be out 1 or 2 days later, but unfortunately they wrapped it too tight and I wasn't able to get any food or water into my stomach at all. They thought it was swelling. They left me for 10 days without any food or water down, but I had water through an IV. I dropped about 9 kilos in total over those few months and 5 kilos within 10 days. And I was in a really bad state until they actually had to go back in and undo that surgery completely. And since then, I now have Botox to my esophagus to try and get things to move through. Because even after undoing the majority of that surgery, it's still created an issue with it being too tight when it goes into my stomach opening. And they realized that in my surgery at birth, they damaged my vagus nerve, which is in control of, you know, some of your heart rhythms, your digestion and all of that. So that was a massive realization. And they basically said that it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when, to needing to get my whole esophagus removed and be fed by a tube. So even though things seem wonderful now, there's a lot on the horizon and there's a lot that I basically just need to try and process and reaffirm that what I'm doing is what I feel fulfilled doing, and just to focus on the present and let the future decide for itself, because all the predictions I've had so far of negative things haven't always been right. So hopefully I'm on a good luck streak. So this is something funny that I wanted to put in about visualization. So this may come across as arrogant, and I'm so sorry if it does, because I do not mean it in that way. But this is a message from my manager previously asking if I wanted to be a stage assistant for the Queensland Young Achiever of the Year Awards. I said I'd rather be a nominee for them, but of course I have to do something really awesome if I wanted to do that. So that wasn't at all my motivation for doing what I did, but I worked just so hard. And it turned out last year I was the winner of the Leadership Award for 7 News Queensland Young Achiever of the Year, because of the work that I've done impacting positive change in health and being an ambassador and a role model for other people with disability. Since then, I've also been a keynote at more medical conferences where I'm surrounded by other people that are professors. It just blows me away that I have an opportunity as a consumer to be able to give my perspective, and that it's actually becoming so valued in healthcare systems. So if you've had any experience with health and you want to have a say, I really encourage you to go forward and do that, because they actually, in their safety and quality standards, standard 2, they need to partner with consumers. So it's really incredible to be able to do this and to actually have a voice in a system where you feel like you don't have much of a choice when you're kind of dying and you need whatever help you can get. Since then, I've gone on to speak at a research conference with the Royal Brisbane about the importance of partnering with consumers. And I've also started an initiative called the Wellness Empowerment Movement, which is all about sharing people's personal stories with chronic illness, whether that be physical, emotional, mental, trauma, accidents. I don't care if you've got a story, we want to hear it. And it's been really incredible to see the purpose that that's brought to people. Even though for me, it just seems like something that I post on social media about every so often. I've seen people that have become ambassadors, like a beautiful 13-year-old girl over in America who has my condition, and they've just flourished because they've finally realized how I realized it and how I wished I had someone guide me when I was younger, that you can do a lot with sharing your story. And if you're actually proud of who you are, despite your differences or despite adversity, like the world's your oyster, incredible things can happen. So anyway, if you'd like to contact me, that's it for now. I'll give you an update later, maybe when I've achieved some other things. But for now, you can go visit my website, email me, like follow me on social media. I'll interact with you if you've got any questions. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble for a really, really long time. And thank you, Leslie, for the opportunity.
I'm blown away. I mean, like, I knew a little bit about your history, but far out. It's like every other thing was like a turning point, like some Rubik's Cube of doom and hope.
It has been, and I just can't believe like how it's been so woven in from a young age, you know, being in my family business and speaking about my story and how suddenly none of that made sense then, but all the pieces come together and make sense later. And I, like you were saying about the atomic, it's the tiny little things and they suddenly just add up to something incredible.
Yeah. And I love that you've been speaking on this topic since you were a small child. And as each year goes by, there's something else to add to this amazing journey that you've been on. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like I wish we had time to ask you heaps of questions and stuff, but we're kind of out of time. But so keen to learn more about your story. Thank you for giving us your social media contacts. And I have something to ask you, but I'll ask you that tomorrow sometime.
Awesome. Sounds
I'm excited. Sorry?
Sorry for going over time. I appreciate you all staying. Thank you.
Oh, no. Like I was enthralled. But yes, thank you everyone who did stay. Again, like I'd love to be able to dive into other people's stories a bit, but there will be other opportunities for that. And you know, I am connected to everyone here in some way, so I definitely want to check in with everyone at some stage at a time when my daughter's not being a bit whingy about her bedtime routine. That's what Daddy's for. Okay, so thank you very, very much for your attendance and for your participation. And I haven't finalized any details for the next meetup, but I am planning to have one in March. Make sure to stay connected to what we're doing through the meetup group on Facebook, because that's where I'll just be pumping out announcements for our next speaker. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that, I think.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, and thank you, Stone, Scott, Tiffany, Michael, and Kagi. How you doing, Kagi? And I bid you all farewell. Mwah. Bye-bye. Good night.